Okay, today I'm chatting with Julien. Magnifique. Julien or Julien? Good question. Let's figure that out. Right. Time to get into a positive communication mindset, Danny. Hee hee. Smile, Danny. Come on. Hee. Okay, there we go. Positivity level activated. So, let's rock.
The Community Lab, your podcast that connects professional communication research, practice, and people.
Hi, and welcome to the Community Lab. I'm Danny, your host, guide, and curious mind behind this knowledge transfer adventure. Thanks for tuning in today's Lab Talk. So, here's the story. Back in March this year, I found myself at the annual conference of the Positive Communication Network. First time there, and bam! Julien Mirivel stood out. Not just because he's one of the network's founding members, but because of how passionate he is about something we often take for granted: the power of positive communication. In this lab talk, we explore why positive communication isn't just feel-good fluff. It's essential for connection, for leadership, and for creating spaces where people actually want to show up. From reducing loneliness to motivating teams, Julien makes the case that how we speak truly shapes how we lead and live. So, get ready to shift your energy. Crack a smile, lean in, and follow Julien into the uplifting and thought-provoking world of positive communication. Enjoy. Hi, Julien. Welcome to the Community Lab. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to spend the time with you.
Yeah, I'm excited too, Julien. Or Julien. We will talk about it a little bit later on. Before we dive into your journey and your research on positive communication and its implication, I'll hand it over to ChatGPT as usual, which has prepared an introduction for today's guest, namely you. So let's see what it came up with for you.
Okay, awesome.
Julien Mirivel is a professor of applied communication at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where he has also served as Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Communication. He is widely recognized as a founding scholar of positive communication, a field that explores how everyday talk can foster connection, lead effectively, and create meaningful change. His research focuses on the communicative behaviors that shape positive human relationships and inspire excellence in organizational and educational contexts. He is the author of 2 influential books, The Art of Positive Communication, Theory and Practice, and How Communication Scholars Think and Act, a Lifespan Perspective. He is also a co-founder of the Positive Communication Network, a global community of scholars and practitioners committed to the study and practice of uplifting communication. Over the years, he has published widely, given countless keynotes and workshops, and helped translate research into action for leaders, educators, and professionals alike. Based on his body of work, ChatGPT thinks Professor Mirivel is not just a scholar, but a beacon of intentional, values-based communication. His work reminds us that words matter not only in what they say, but in how they make others feel. In times when negativity often dominates public discourse, his commitment to positive communication is both timely and deeply inspiring.
Okay, thanks, ChatGPT.
Thanks, Chat.
So now it's your turn, Julien. So what are your thoughts on the intro?
Actually, I hate to say it, but not bad, Chat. Not bad. There's ways of that ChatGPT framed things that I thought were really nice and actually in some ways accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I have read a little bit more books, recently in particular. So it did not account for that. But I do think it captures what I've been trying to do, which is to share these ideas with lots of people everywhere. And I really believe in the communication discipline and what we're trying to do. and especially this new movement. So in general, pretty good. It doesn't have the personal touch, you know. I mean, I think it's important for people to know that I'm originally from France, that I was an exchange student and came to the United States when I was 15 years old just to learn English. And then I ended up staying, but that experience really shaped the work that I ended up doing, mostly because as you may have faced yourself, you know, I didn't speak the language. So when I landed in Iowa, I couldn't really interact with people. I became isolated very quickly, alone. And it was kind of learning the language that set me free from that. It was communication that set me free from that sense of aloneness. I moved from being alone to connected. I'm happy to share more, but I don't think ChatGPT did terrible on that one. Sadly.
You can't 100% rely on ChatGPT for sure. It's great that you mention it, Julien, but I can totally relate. So because I'm at HEC Montreal, and as we know, Quebec is Francophone, and I did learn French, but I forgot a lot. And then when I started here, after a while, I took classes too. Quebecois is also a bit different than the French, right?
Absolutely.
So it's pretty tricky. And, you know, it's also like when you try to speak French and people are like, oh my God, that's not going anywhere. Then they switch to English usually. And so the progress, you know, it you know, slow, at some point it stopped, to be honest. Let's pick it up. So because I'm also interested in the personal journeys of my guests and how they became communication scholars. As you mentioned, it started with you being 15 years old as an exchange student in the US. But is there another story, or is there something on top of that story that eventually was the reason for you becoming a communication scholar eventually?
Well, I mean, so then, you know, I went to after graduated high school. So I came back a second year, which is very unusual for exchange students. And then I finished high school in the United States. Then I went to the University of Northern Iowa. Well, to be honest, I fell in love with the study of communication. I think that I did have some affinity for public speaking. And in my second book that I wrote, I do talk about that a lot of the scholars, you know, found that they had affinity with the skills required by the discipline. And I think for me, public speaking was one of them. I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it to the day, even though I still get nervous sometimes, but I enjoyed that process. And then really two things happened. I had fantastic mentors, and I had two teachers who kind of took me under their wing. One of them, his name was Bill, and really inspired me to want to become a scholar. You know, I did an independent study with him. We studied the origins of language. And suddenly I just found myself, you know, thinking about communication in that way. And then a little bit later on, I think if you pick up almost any book that I've written recently, I always give credit to this professor. His name is Marvin Jensen. He's still alive.
Okay.
And was an amazing teacher. And in fact, I'm working on a project interviewing a bunch of the students who have had the pleasure of having him as a professor, because to this day, I have, like, right next to me in my office right here, I have the notes from that class.
Oh, wow.
I have the notes left over from him. And I think, you know, I'll tell you, so one thing he wrote on the board that shapes the work that I do today, he said that a student of communication, once they graduate, should exemplify that the spoken word, spoken honorably and well, can make a difference that no other form of communication can equal.
Okay.
That's a direct quote from 25 years ago now.
Wow. Okay. Good memory.
Well, I've been studying it. You know, I told you I forgot his note.
True. Yeah.
To me, in those classes, he really was trying to get us thinking that, you know, obviously communication is not just about transmitting information. It's very much about reflecting our character, reflecting who we are, and then, of course, creating something beyond ourselves. And I can't tell you how impactful that was. Obviously, once I finished my undergrad, I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder, where I had amazing mentors as well there. You know, I was fortunate to study with Karen Tracy, fortunate to have Robert Craig on my committee, Larry Fry, took classes with Stan Dietz. I mean, at the time, these were really great scholars all around.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that the experience that really shaped who I am today is my undergraduate teacher, Marvin.
Fascinating. That's great. From my personal experiences, is as a communication scholar, it's often tricky to separate the personal from the professional when it comes to approaching communication or thinking about communication. But let's give it a shot.
Sure.
what does communication mean to you personally and from a professional perspective, or is it the same?
Well, hold on. Let's break it down and see where I come out together. I haven't thought about this. So,
Okay, let's do that.
so what does it mean? What communication means to me personally? To me, communication means my ability reflects my ability to create meaningful relationships with people in my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
If I study communication and I cannot have meaningful connections with my children, if I can't build a meaningful friendship that lasts over the decades, if I can't have a healthy marriage, if I can't make a difference as a teacher or as a leader. So to me, communication is very personal in that way. Like we can theorize about it, and I think that's great, and we ought to do it. But at the end of the day, it's about us. It's about what we're able to do with those skills. And so I think personally, I take that personally. Professionally, I think it's related. I think it's related to my mission, which is, to inspire people to communicate more positively at work and at home. And as I mentioned, I really do think we should study this topic theoretically. We should conduct the top of the line research. And I don't think I'm that guy. I don't think I'm like the best theorist. I don't think I'm the best researcher. I think that maybe my strength is more about taking these ideas and helping ourselves think about how we can practice them every day.
Yeah.
And to be honest, a lot of that is very personal. I want to practice them because I know that communication has power. And if I'm not practicing it, then I think studying it means quite nothing, to be honest.
I totally agree. So you live up to your communication ideals, so to speak, both in your private life and in your professional life.
I try. I don't know that I live up to them. I mean, I fail all the time. I try.
We all do, yeah.
I will say that I'm inspired by colleagues in my department who do the same. I've been surrounded by people who do make an effort to be better teachers, who do make an effort to be present with their family. I've got colleagues with whom I've really looked up to as people who had children before I had children, and I just saw the way they acted and interacted and took care of their children. So I think we have that kind of mission in my home department. But absolutely, I kind of take it to heart that we need to be practicing these skills. And I actually think we haven't done enough. We don't even know if we're better than we were 20 years ago. We don't even know if our students drastically are improving their communication skills. And I think we should be worried about that. I think that's a primary reason why we exist.
Wise words. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks for sharing this personal side, so to speak, when it comes to your career and your research trajectory, but also your personal application of what you're studying and also preaching, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now that we've explored that, I want to focus more on the research side of things.
Absolutely.
Particularly, of course, your work on positive communication, a topic that you've been championing now for decades? Years for sure?
Years for sure.
But maybe already decades. And it has gained, increasing relevance, especially in today's world, which is a mess. I mean, that's maybe too harsh, but kind of a mess. And so to get us started here, could you briefly explain what positive communication is and how would you contrast it with something that we might call negative communication?
Yeah, and of course, we've played with some of these definitions, right? But today, I think I would say that positive communication refer to behaviors. So I often think about what we do. There are behaviors, or for people who like language and social interaction, which is kind of my training, speech acts, things we say and do that are designed by their functions to enrich relationships. They are productive and constructive, right? I know you're asking also about negative communication. So I think an easy way of dividing kind of the realm of what we can do is there are things we do that are destructive, and there are things we do that are constructive for ourselves, for our relationships, for our workplaces, for our communities. And it is part of the task of researchers to study them, to identify which of those things are productive, which of those things are destructive. We kind of have some ideas, we're not new at this, so we have ideas about what those are. I think For me, positive communication also exemplifies our potential. So I like to make, when I teach this, I like to say, there's there's who we are, our actuality, and there's also our potentiality. And I think in every interaction that exists, there's what we could do and what we should do. There's what we actually do and what we could have done. And doesn't make it easy. It just, for me, positive communication reflects kind of this ideal form of communication, things that we have the potential to do, that we sometimes do, like to just take me as a father, right? So maybe some days I'm not really listening really deeply to my kids, right? They're driving me crazy. Maybe my daughter has asked me 1,000 times for something, right? And in that moment, I would say maybe I'm not exemplifying listening. But there's sometimes maybe in the evening and I'm sitting next to her and we're reading a book and then she's telling me about her day and I really am listening deeply. And so that possibility is inside of me and I can bring it to bear in human interaction. So positive communication, if you go back to kind of some of the first things that I wrote about it, they were actually connected to this notion of virtue, right? So I was really puzzling with this idea of what does it look like when we communicate at our best? And of course, Aristotle was very helpful with that by pointing out that human beings' primary function is actually to be virtuous. And we stretch ourselves with our capacity when we move towards compassion, when we move towards justice, when we move towards generosity or gentleness or humility. And so I started really reflecting about what those are. So positive communication to me reflects productive moves. They reflect a notion of confidence, because I do think you have to build kind of who you are in making some of these moves. And then, of course, a notion of excellence. The easier distinction, positive communication is productive. Negative communication tends to be destructive.
I'm also very interested in studying humor in organizations. And sometimes humor is unfelicitous, so to speak, when we talk about speech acts, right?
Absolutely.
And you had the best intentions, but you accidentally offended someone. It's like, damn it, actually, it was supposed to be positive communication, but it was destructive. So eventually it's negative communication, right? So it is not so easy.
It is not easy. And I think part of my work has been trying to simplify it for the simple reason that I think we need to give people some compass and ourselves some compass for how to act and what we can aspire to. But I never intended to really simplify the complexity of human interaction. I do think that part of being a good communicator is something we are doing in our field, which is we're studying the complexity of it. But, in that exchange you're describing, there's two pieces to it, right? Is one, you're genuinely trying to create some humor in the workplace. And it comes from a good place, from a good heart. And so I think other communicators can also begin maybe to appreciate it in that way too, right? We can also think, oh, well, Danny in that moment, he's trying to create, may not be perfect, may not be the best move he's made, but he's trying to help create this collegial environment. Anyway, I was reflecting on that as a moment. I think we can each learn from these moments. And you're right, what may seem to be at some point a positive act of communication can become problematic. But by problematizing too much, then we forget that we can also aspire to these behaviors.
Exactly. Okay, great. Then another question before we talk about your model, which is very insightful and very inspiring. I would like to know something that you mentioned in an introduction to a special issue in the Journal of Business Communication. Where you state that positive communication is a paradigm shift, which is quite a powerful statement, right? So can you unpack what you mean by this paradigm shift?
Yes. So from a scholarly perspective, I think that our discipline has been predominantly focused with the study of negative communication behavior, problematic communication behavior, dilemmatic communication behavior. And so really what we've been doing is we've been studying problems, and we have been, and very often not really offering a lot of solutions, to be honest.
Yeah, true.
But problematizing the notion of communication. So when I say it's a paradigm shift, I'm really just joining scholars in other disciplines, including psychology, the field of psychology, the field of business, who have kind of begun to pose new questions So in psychology, it was instead of focusing on the problem of the patient, to try to identify what was working well. That's a big shift in the way you're thinking. Is instead of focusing on what's going wrong, you're focusing, well, what's going well?
Mm-hmm.
Appreciative inquiry has made that kind of move, in terms of studying organizations and helping them solve big problems. Let's begin to shift our questions. So from my vantage point, I'm not suggesting anybody should completely agree with that, but from my vantage point, I think we need to do more to study communication in its best self. I don't know how else to describe it. What would that look like? So, for example, we have a concept of peak communication that draws on Maslow's work, picked up in 1983 by Ron Gordon, and this notion that we have moments of communication where we experience tremendous amount of joy, tremendous amount of happiness. Well, what are those moments about? I mean, if you Google right now, communication conflict, you're going to find a bunch of research.
Oh, yeah.
But if you Google communication and happiness and try to identify research articles that show you how we create happiness through communication, you're not going to find that many.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to find that many that focus on the nature of joy.
Yeah.
There's a burgeoning move in that direction. Like, I think we could find some work on gratitude. We could find some research on maybe even leadership courage, but they would be far and few.
Yeah.
Another example, so my friend and colleague Rob Ulmer published a piece that's been very popular on crisis communication. Very often when people study crisis, they look at the crisis, they look at the problem. But what he's done is he's looked at leaders who respond in extraordinary ways. Why are we not studying people who are doing things right? So if you pick up my book, The Art of Positive Communication Theory and Practice, which was my first book, I would argue that it's one of the few textbooks in the field that only shows example to students about positive behaviors. If you pick up other books, they're often interactions of conflict, interactions of problems. Somebody is failing at this. Why not show our students that we can also really shine, and we need to be studying those moments of shining? I'll stop here, but this is kind of what I'm thinking about that.
I love this approach, this attitude. So, because I think as a scholar, we always, focus on the negativity of society. So also in communication. So as you mentioned, crisis communication, there's also like this positive part, but initially it's focusing on crisis and therefore on something negative. So I totally agree, and I have to reflect on my attitude as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Danny.
As already mentioned, you developed this model of positive communication, which I find very insightful. I think, if I can remember correctly, it's like 6 features.
Yes.
Could you walk us through the key components of that model and what you want to explain by it?
Absolutely. So the heart of the model is really designed to be a compass for helping people reflect and think and act as communicators. I think of it today more as a point of reflection, but it is a model designed to be descriptive of what positive communication is. It's not comprehensive. So it's not designed to say, these are all the positive communication behaviors. These are selected communication behaviors. But they're also normative. It's a normative model in the sense that it tells people, these are things you might want to try. These are things that perhaps we should aspire to moving in the direction. So if you took a look at the model, it's available online. It looks like this, it's right next to my desk to try to influence me a little bit. And I argue that there are really 6 behaviors that are the key for productive communication, things people can work on. Remember that my task for a long time is really a pedagogical task, which is how can I help my students communicate better in their own lives? And of course, we can teach them theory, but often they're diffuse. There's not a unifying framework. So my goal is to create that kind of unifying framework. So 6 behaviors. The first one is greet, and each behavior is connected to a principle. So the model says that when you greet others, you have the ability to create human connection, that the opening moments of interaction are really critical in the world of relationships. I believe that when you ask meaningful questions like you're doing today, Danny,
I try.
You're exploring me, you're putting yourself in a position of discovery. What you're doing when you ask questions is you discover the unknown. You are taking a stance of humility. I argue in the model that when you choose to compliment, you have the ability to affect people, both who they are in the moment, but more importantly, who they become. I believe that when we disclose authentically, genuinely, that we have the ability to deepen our relationships with others.
Yeah.
The fifth behavior is encouraging. So I believe that when we encourage, we have the ability to give each other social support. Communication is a tangible gift. To me, it is. We use communication to give each other love. We give each other to alleviate suffering. We use communication to give each other the support we need to overcome some of these difficult moments in our lives. And then the last behavior is listening. If you can listen deeply, I believe that we can transcend the perceived differences that exist between us and other people.
So like active listening.
Active listening, I sometimes I go back to Martin Buber, moving from I, it to I, thou.
Mm-hmm.
This notion of building empathy, or Carl Rogers' unconditional positive regard. There's a lot of concepts that we can draw on. So really this notion of listening deeply and learning to being more fully present, more engaged. But not just, I don't want it to be just about just repeat what the other person has said. I want people to think more deeply about what listening actually is.
Mm-hmm.
At the heart of the model, I've got kind of the words inspire and influence. So I argue in the model that when you practice these behaviors, well, you start to inspire and influence people around you. You're changing who you are, which changes your relationships, which changes your workplaces, your communities, and hopefully the world at large.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the quick premise of the model in less than 2 minutes.
Very well done. You also teach it to your students, and you're also a coach. We'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. So you teach it and also give examples. And do you also do like role plays, or how do you teach it?
Well, I teach, and to me, with my students in particular, I like to focus on a couple things, lots of ways. But one of them is reflection. So I do want people thinking about greetings. So, greetings seem simple, but they're not.
Mm. I know people who don't greet.
Right. There are people who don't greet, but sometimes we have a tendency to either move towards other people or we withdraw from connection. And if you look at the loneliness epidemic taking place in our society, 1 in 4 people in the world feels fairly or very lonely, according to Gallup.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, why is that? It's harder and harder for us to make contact with one another. So greeting has a component of reflection. It has a component of skill. Maybe you know how to greet in English, but do you know how to greet in German? Do you know how to greet in France? Do you know how to greet in China? Your skill set can is almost exponential, and it's a hallmark of confidence. So I'd like my students to reflect about the behavior. I like my students to study. I don't do that in coaching, obviously, but I want my students to conduct mini research project around these behaviors to see how they play out.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing is to practice it. So as you identify, it's challenging ourselves. It's maybe as simple, like sometimes I tell my students, okay, choose 3 people you've really admired, and I would like you to reach out to them and see if you can schedule a Zoom phone call with them.
Okay.
Seems easy, but it's not. Right away you're going to be facing, well, what are they going to think about me? Should I be making contact with them? And there's like a process. So those 3 elements to me are the heart of how you can develop these skills: reflect, research, and then of course the third one, which is practice. Put it into action, see what happens.
Okay, great. After the model, so I stumbled over a recent paper that you co-authored, a study involving 815 women in India who participated in self-help groups supported by a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
Among other things, they also received communication training. And your findings show a significant link between communication skills or competence and positive communication. So what stood out to you in the research, and why do the findings matter? I find it very fascinating.
Thanks. So this is part of a project that I began in 2019. So I should give you some context. The nonprofit organization Heifer International, which is actually headquartered here in Little Rock, reached out to me because they wanted to document the transformation that was taking place in men and women that they were helping around the globe. Okay. And Heifer has helped over 46 million households end poverty in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
As a result of these initiatives that they were launching, that people were experiencing a unique personal transformation, and they wanted me to find a way to measure it for them. So today, I'm proud to say that we have helped them. We've given them a metric that we've tried to develop. I'm not a quantitative researcher, so I formed a team to try to get that done. And we have a metric that they can use to assess the impact of their programming.
Mhm.
So the study that you read is a project we conducted in India, some of the most impoverished region in the world. We went to Bihar, India, partially because a donor had given money to try to make a difference in the lives of 70,000 people. So we're talking big scale here.
Yeah.
The thing that really amazes me is, we did multiple studies. We did cross-sectional studies. We did longitudinal. So we're actually going to keep on collecting data from some of these participants.
Okay.
What we found essentially is that one of the core elements that they, across the board, develop their communication skills.
Interesting.
I find that amazing too. They live in the poorest of the poorest regions of the world. And of course, economic development is something you want, but what's also happening at the same time is that they are improving their communication skills. That's what we show in the data, that communication is part of transformation.
In the study, you also developed a scale for positive communication.
Yes.
What I found so fascinating is that communication skills is statistically significantly related to positive communication. I would infer that, wow, if you're skilled, if you're a competent communicator, positive communication must be a part of it.
Yeah, they're related very much. Yeah. I was not anticipating from the beginning of the project that communication would be a crucial part of it, but in almost every country we went to, the most significant progress of participants in their transformation were their communication skills. And they were moving, as you just pointed out, towards positive communication.
Mm-hmm.
What our data shows is that people make change gradually. There's no magic potion.
Damn it.
I know, we want it. We're like, I can just like that become the best communicator. And that is not what's happening. What's happening is what we call a gradual awakening. People don't like that term, but I think of it like it's just a gradual process of transformation. It's not night and day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes some effort, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A fascinating study. I really like it. And since it's still ongoing, I look forward to upcoming results. So
Thank you. We're trying to publish some of those.
Before we talk about the practical applications of positive communication, your research and so on, I want to make a quick shift.
Yeah.
I'm also interested a little bit in positive communication and leadership. Because even though positive communication should be relevant for every human being, or also dogs, I don't know, you also place emphasis on leaders and leadership.
Yeah.
I'm curious, why should leaders in particular aim to communicate positively, especially when, as we all know, even the harshest bullies get to the top?
Yeah, that's a great question. That frustrates me a lot.
Okay, then it's the two of us. Congrats.
Well, first, let's tackle the first part of the question, which is why is it important? And leaders have tremendous influence. They're in positions of power. They're in positions of authority. And of course, they affect the lives of many. And sometimes, when we talk about leadership in organizational context, that can be a manager or supervisor. Obviously, the CEO has more impact. And just from the research that we know that in general, people want to work in a place where they feel valued, where they feel respected, where they can grow and develop.
Of course.
The thing is that we know how to get it there. We know what it takes for leaders to lead in a way that would get people there. And positive communication is a part of that, which is why I love the work, being done at the University of Michigan and the positive, really what's a positive business school there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, they have an entire, they have the Center for Positive Organizations, which was co-founded by 3 professors of business who really have created this paradigm shift also it's very popular in the field of business. The other why that I would add is what we know when we study, for example, these places where this is taking place, is that actually the positive leaders accomplish and lead the organization to be extremely successful. But they also move from, for example, being economically successful to a whole new realm, which is they become generous, right? So they move, according to, this is Kim Cameron's work, when people are, think about it like a bell curve, right? So we've got terrible organizations right here. We've got most people average. And then what they've been studying is these extraordinary workplaces. And what we find there is that these leaders not only can create that environment, but when they have the environment and the great leadership, they end up creating a place where people accomplish extremely beautiful, meaningful goals. Mm-hmm. So my work, and I would say mostly practically, I did write my latest book is Positive Communication for Leaders with Alex Lyon, where we try to take my model and we try to show, okay, here's what it would look like to become this kind of person. And it's important. Mm-hmm. Does this help answer the first part?
Yeah, definitely. Now let's talk about the bullies and narcissists that we see a lot at the top of organizations.
Yeah, man. So that's unfortunate, and so I'm not sure I can explain why they become successful. I do think that, like John Gottman in the context of marriage used to always say that to maintain a healthy relationship, we have to have a 1-to-5 ratio, right? So for every one negative act in the relationship, it needs to be compensated by 5 positive acts. I do think that in some ways, negative communication can be more powerful, and it takes more work on the positive side to kind of compensate for that negative behavior. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, I'm not sure why are we electing leaders? It's interesting from a professional standpoint, because I do think that in the workplace, generally the leaders who are bullies, who are not very negative, they actually don't make it to the top very often. I've been in positions of leadership where I can tell you that we got rid of a leader like that.
Okay, congrats.
People can sometimes create alliances and they can try to fight their way through that. But the damage that those people do is incredible. And it can take years for an organization to recover, as it can take years for a person who's been bullied in the workplace to recover. So I don't know that I can solve the why, we allow these leaders to come to the workplace. All I can try to argue is that, and what I will argue, is that if that bully learns to become a positive leader, that they will experience something completely different. Yeah. Some of that includes meaningful relationship, extraordinary results beyond what they're able to accomplish by bullying people. They'll be able to retain their employees. They'll be able to create a culture of respect and value, and they'll be able to serve their stakeholders much more productively. So the results will actually be better than they would. And that's why you see, like, even within coaching, there's coaches that are very negative, that yell at the athletes. And then you've got coaches like, there was a story recently in the New York Times about the coach of the Yankees. And at the end of every game, that coach selects an athlete who has performed something extraordinary that maybe nobody noticed, but that helped people do something great that day. And he writes a nice little note on a baseball, and he goes and deliver it to that athlete. That coach knows that in order to get to outstanding performance, he's got to focus on building on strength and not on weaknesses. To me, positive leadership is a choice. I mean, it's something the person will have to decide to do based upon the latest evidence we have that it does work.
Great. You're also a coach, right? A communication coach.
Yeah.
And what do you recommend also for leaders to learn, to practice, and when it comes to the everyday interactions, and also across hierarchical level? Because I think this is the main issue here. When you're at the top, you're nice to your peers, but maybe not to the average Joe, average Shane, so to speak. What advice do you give them, to how to interact positively with peers as well as people who are far below in the hierarchy?
Well, first, I would, based upon what you just said, I would tell them to do just that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's so easy, actually. Why do I ask?
To make sure that they engage with people in a humble way. If you're the CEO of a company, it means the world to be connected to. When you reach out to somebody who is lower on the totem pole, as you pointed out, it means the world to be connected, to be seen, to be valued, to be acknowledged. And so anything you can do to do that would be great. And that is part of your job. I think that part of what happens as people climb, I faced it again when I moved from chair to associate dean to dean, is that it's become so more difficult because you feel like your whole job is about completing more tasks. And the tasks of the job take over what really needs to be extremely important, which is the relationships that you have with other people. And so part of great leadership is being able to manage and create and build meaningful relationships with people, hopefully for the long term. And I think you'll see some people are very successful at that.
While you were talking, I was like thinking, what kind of advice or activities do you suggest for people like at the top?
So first, I'll tell you, the first things that I do is I ask people to practice this.
Yeah. Your model. So because people don't see it, your model.
Yeah. The model. So I want people practicing my model of positive communication. I want them playing with these ideas. So if I'm working with an executive and part of the conversation is realizing that they're not connecting to certain stakeholders. So it's possible that they're connecting to their immediate stakeholders, but maybe they're not connecting to stakeholders they need to be connecting to. Like one of the person I was working with a while back had great relationships with his team, but he was really suffering from great relationships with the C-suite, which is the people he was kind of not competing, but the people he needs to be a part of, right? But he was not inviting them to lunch. He was not connecting them over coffee. He was not spending time in the office. So it's about rebuilding those relationships there.
Yeah.
There are practical things. In the book, we interviewed my friend and colleague, Robert Omer, who was my first boss. And I think he did this in a magical way. He made relationship his total priority. And he would tell you that relationship is not an outcome for me. I'm not trying to do something. I'm not trying to build these relationships to get somewhere. I value them. So relationship to me is the outcome. It is the thing that I'm after.
Yeah.
So we want to teach these executives how to do that, but often they are having a hard time. So I think building some habits, especially in the morning when coming into work, it can be as simple as swinging by people's offices and saying hello, engaging in a quick small talk, checking on people's families, anything like that gets that relationship. And often people are surprised when you start there, it opens up a lot of space for other conversations that may be work related. And now you're solving problems you would have had to solve by email. So now you're not getting an email. I try to teach people that, you need to control your calendar so that the calendar does not control you and your relationship. So it's tempting. You have an administrative assistant. If you do, then definitely you would want to train your assistant to know how to use the calendar. But what people do in leadership is they book themselves 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9, 9:30, 10, 10:30. I mean, it just keeps on going. Then all you do is you treat those moments of interaction like an I-it, like if we go back to Martin Buber, right? You are an object to my day. But we have to move into kind of the I-thou connection. So when I coach people, I take each of these behaviors that I've talked to you about in the model, greeting, asking. We do that in our book with Alex, by the way, and show here's how you implement this in a very concrete way. But it is a process, and it's something that you have to think and work actively at. But I think your success in creating that culture will depend on your ability to do that. The culture where people feel valued and respected and included.
Julien, as you might know, this podcast also reaches communication professionals.
Yes.
Working in areas like corporate comms, like internal communication, public relations, and so forth. So what can they also take away from the concept of positive communication, and how could it be meaningfully integrated into their communication strategies?
Great question.
Thank you.
So first, I would say, obviously, again, back at the individual level, these are behaviors that you can practice. I think there's things you can do, internally with internal communication. So for example, creating sessions of dialogue so people can engage with one another in conversations. There's a number of existing, what we call liberating structures that can help facilitate those kinds of conversations. I'm partnering right now with a large state agency. They're running a virtue-based internal initiative that's all grounded, and kind of every week they're announcing a new virtue and how it can be practiced every day. And I think that's scaling up this idea from individual level to group level. I mean, I think after that is just a notion of creativity, right? What my model says is these are the things that you have to think about. that greeting is really this ability to invite connection. So take this idea of inviting connection, inviting dialogue, inviting people closer rather than pushing them away. When I was dean, we used that principle in so many ways. I created an event every month that was called Coffee with the Dean. And I brought in all the faculty and staff, a selection, so one per department, one per unit. And then I would have pastry with them, and we would just talk about their research or their teaching or whatever they were experiencing. And that was just my attempt to connect. That's internal, right? I did the same thing with students. So every month, I had a student lunch with the dean, and that allowed me to connect with like 20 students. But 20 students month one, 20 month two, that's 40, 60, 80, 100. You do that over 3 years, you know a lot of students personally.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I want people thinking about. Or, okay, take this notion of listening deeply, right? Very often we don't take the pulse. So I would say one thing you would want to do in any organization right now, in any group, is you measure your actual level of employee engagement. Use the Q12 questions from Gallup on employee engagement and get a sense of what's good and what's not. And I would lead an internal strategy to respond to that. You may find out that people, like one of the key questions in Gallup is, have you been praised in the last 7 days? Most workplaces, that's not happening.
Can't imagine, yeah.
So you need to teach your leaders, you need to teach your managers, your supervisors to incorporate this behavior into their ways of leading. And you're going to see some tangible progress in your company and in your employee engagement. You're going to find when you have high levels of employee engagement, I mean, this has been so documented in literature, amazing things happen, satisfaction, loyalty to the organization, retention of employees, performance, economic progress. It even improves how stocks are doing for your company. So, I mean, if your people are doing well, your company is going to be doing well.
And so then your employees who are happy because of the positive communication throughout the organization are good ambassadors in this sense.
Yeah.
In a few episodes, we also talked about the role of employees as ambassador. So also as communicators, right?
Yeah, I mean, now it's going to have this little, I call it a butterfly effect, right? It's like you make these little changes, and these changes have impacts beyond what you're doing. And I think creating a positive culture in your company is not a thing you accomplish in a day. It's something you'll work at your whole career because it's dynamic, as we know, right? It changes. You hire new people, they bring negativity. Now you've got to address that, right? So you have to, this is going to be part of your mission. It's something you're going to have to do every day, all the time.
Okay, good. So before we wrap up, let's look ahead briefly.
All right.
So what are the next big questions you want to explore in your research, and what's on the horizon for you?
Well, the horizon for me right now is I'm working on a second edition of my Art of Positive Communication Theory and Practice. I published it 10 years ago, so I really want that book to be updated. And so that's going to come out in 2026, hopefully.
Okay, I look forward to it.
Other big project is to, we have all these data that we've collected from our work with Heifer across multiple countries. So obviously my team and I are working on publications for those. And then I'm doing my own very personal little project here on, as I mentioned, I really want to understand what made my teacher, Marvin Jensen, so impactful. What kind of teacher was he, and how did students experience him? And so we're right about 25 years since I graduated. So I'm leading a small project where I'm interviewing people who graduated approximately 25 years ago and seeing if they felt the same kind of impact that I felt. And I'll tell you what I discover.
Okay. I look forward to that. So yeah, best of luck for your future endeavors. It sounds very promising. And I especially look forward to the edited book.
Thank you so much.
So it's game time.
All right, let's do it.
So our quick fire round, 5 rapid questions, 5 spontaneous answers, no overthinking allowed.
Okay,
then let's go.
The quick fire round.
What's one thing you do every day, no matter how busy life gets?
I write.
Every day. So do you have 1 page, 2 pages? Some people have this goal
So I'm more of a time person. I'm like 8 to 9, and my goal is 1 hour.
Okay.
And so I don't judge the content. I don't judge how far, but I do try to write as often as I can.
If you weren't a communication scholar, what might you be doing instead?
I took my son to the University of Arkansas Fayetteville because he's a junior in high school just to visit. And I think that a part of me would have liked architecture.
So you like designing and stuff like that?
Well, I actually don't, but I like the notion of precision, and I think that I kind of enjoyed math when I was younger. And so I think I would have enjoyed that kind of technical aspect of it. Creativity, and also something very practical where you see results, right?
Okay. Third question. What's your favorite aha moment from teaching or coaching?
Favorite aha moment? In teaching, this was a big one. I watched a TED Talk by the guy who won some award from TED a long time ago, and he gave a talk about how he was going into these places and he was putting computers into these spaces, and kids were like learning without any teacher.
Okay.
And it led to this kind of little revolution in me that, yes, I am important to the learning process, but actually I can lead my students to learn without me being there. And that kind of changed the way that I was approaching the classroom. Sometimes I would literally leave the classroom. I would say, here's a few things, do this. I'm in my office if you need me. And they would come see me. And so then it would flip the learning where before I was teaching, and now they were learning. They were like, okay, we need his expertise. Let's go ask him how to do that. So that was kind of a nice little aha moment in my teaching.
What's something people often get wrong about you?
I don't know. What do they get wrong? I think sometimes maybe it's my French culture. I think it's possible that people see me and I may come off as arrogant. You know, that I kind of feel like I may come off very confident in the way that I speak. I'm obviously a passionate person, but I actually think I'm more humble than that. I think that I appreciate complexity, and that I don't know that I'm as certain as I think I am.
Okay, good. Then final question. Which of your own research findings has surprised you the most, and why?
Well, I think something I learned from the personal transformation work with Heifer, we learned several things that I think were interesting. One of them is that we did 2 measures. We did a measure of self-efficacy and a measure of self-esteem to kind of appreciate how people were changing internally, psychologically. What we found is that self-esteem does not move at all.
Okay.
But that self-efficacy does. And that finding to me is really critical, and actually supported by more research. As I dived into the literature, found out that in fact, self-esteem in general does not change very much at all, but that self-efficacy is much more malleable. So don't spend your whole life trying to change how you think about yourself. Change the belief that you have about what you can accomplish. I think that's a big aha moment. And then the second that was affirming, is this idea that we can create personal transformation in our own lives by changing the way we communicate. And I believe in that, but to see it happening in the data has been really affirming and inspiring.
Great. This is the perfect answer. Thank you so much, Julien.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you for taking your time for this knowledge transfer podcast and for sharing your insights and on positive communication. It's both inspiring and thought-provoking, and of course, a real pleasure. You're a very positive guy, and I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope to see you soon. By the way, do you want to quickly say something about the Positive Communication Network and why it's, a great thing to be a member?
Yeah, please come join the Positive Communication Network. Mostly, you'll get some email from me about events that we're putting in together. Everything we've done has been free. We have book parties, what we call book parties, where we celebrate authors who are writing books that are making a positive difference in the world. People really love those. We incorporate a little bit of a mini training with some discussion and fireside chat. Every year we have our annual conference. And then we've also been experimenting with some workshops. My colleague Amy Young just delivered a really nice workshop on the power of storytelling. and how to develop positive stories about your own life. So we have more of those events coming up, and I look forward to having you there. We're growing as a community, and I'm excited about that.
Great. Yeah, I'm also a member, and I can only encourage other people to join the Positive Communication Network. Yeah, Julien.
Thank you so much, Danny.
Merci infiniment et à bientôt.
À bientôt, Danny. Thank you so much for having me.
That was the Lab Talk with Julien Mirivel. As always, I hope you found something to take with you. Personally, I discovered that I'm a semi-positive communicator, which feels like a decent start, right? But more importantly, we've learned how something as simple as a warm greeting can shape an entire interaction, and that positive communication isn't some magical trait you're born with. It can be learned, practiced, and yes, eventually mastered. The reward? Stronger teams, better atmospheres, and more meaningful connections. If Julien sparked your interest, check out the 5 hand-picked publications in the show notes. Follow the Community Lab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, where you can subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a Lab Talk. Connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you like what you heard today, pass it on. Friends, colleagues, fellow overthinkers. Sharing is caring. Next time, I'll be joined by Professor Christy Beers-Fagersten from Södertörn University in Sweden. We'll explore a topic that's still a bit taboo in the workplace: swearing. The good, the bad, and the surprisingly useful. Until next time, and don't forget, communication is everywhere. It's in what you say, what you don't, and sometimes in how the US Secretary of Defense shares sensitive intel with his family on a commercial messaging app. Brilliant move. Stay curious and keep the conversation alive.